It wasn't the sting of the coffee that broke her. It was the laughter that followed. Boots scuffing on tile, a uniformed man smirking as hot liquid dripped from her blouse onto the floor. Her beige dress turned dark with spreading stains, but she stayed still, silent, unflinching. Around her, the cafe grew hushed, as if the world was waiting for her to cry out, to fight back, to prove the humiliation had worked. But she didn't. She only lifted her chin, blind eyes fixed on the man who thought her quiet meant powerless. He had no idea who she had raised. The small-town cafe buzzed with the morning rush. Angela Carter, a quiet black woman in her mid-50s, slipped inside, carrying the same soft smile she wore every day. She worked as a library assistant, known for her gentle voice and patience. Few people ever noticed her beyond the checkout counter of the library. She liked it that way. Angela ordered a simple black coffee and found a table near the window. She opened a worn notebook, jotting down lists for her day. To everyone else, she was just another face in the crowd. But across the room, one man's eyes narrowed. Officer Rick Miller strolled in, uniform creased, arrogance in his stride. The cafe went quiet, as it often did when Rick entered. He liked to remind people of his authority, especially when his target was someone he considered beneath him. Today, Angela became that target. He sneered as he passed her table. Without warning, Rick lifted her cup and tilted it, pouring steaming coffee down her neatly folded sweater. Gasps echoed across the cafe. Angela flinched but didn't shout. She simply dabbed at the stain with a napkin, eyes calm, lips pressed tight. The crowd whispered in disbelief, but no one moved. Rick smirked, leaning in close. "Next time, sit somewhere else," he muttered, his tone dripping with contempt. Angela said nothing. She lowered her gaze, her silence more powerful than any outburst. Behind her calm demeanor, something flickered, a strength hidden from the world. One woman in the back, Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, clenched her fists. "That's too far," she whispered, horrified. Rick smirked, believing he had humiliated her completely. But what he didn't know was that Angela Carter had raised someone he would soon regret ever provoking. The cafe fell into an uneasy silence after the cruel act. Steam still rose from Angela's stained sweater as she carefully blotted it with trembling hands. Not once did she look up at Officer Rick Miller. Her calmness puzzled the crowd. Most expected an outburst, or at least a few angry words. But Angela simply folded the napkin, placed it aside, and straightened her notebook as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks, the elderly woman sitting nearby, couldn't contain herself. She rose from her seat, her cane tapping the wooden floor. "That was unnecessary, officer," she said loudly enough for the cafe to hear. Heads turned, murmurs spread. Rick scoffed, flashing his badge like a shield. "Stay out of it, lady. She knows her place." His words dripped with venom. Angela finally lifted her gaze, meeting his with eyes steady and unflinching. Her silence unsettled him more than any retort could. But Rick quickly covered his unease with arrogance, grabbing his coffee and striding to the counter. At the far end of the cafe, Detective Laura Hayes had been watching. Off-duty, dressed in plain clothes, she sipped her drink, noting every detail. Laura knew Rick's reputation. Too many complaints, too many incidents brushed aside by Sheriff Tom Reynolds. But this was public. This was bold. She pulled out her phone, subtly recording the aftermath. Around her, customers whispered. Some shook their heads in disgust. Others kept their eyes low, afraid of what Rick might do if challenged. Angela closed her notebook, her hands steady now. She stood, nodded politely to Evelyn, and left without a word. Her quiet exit carried a weight heavier than any confrontation. Rick smirked after her, convinced he had won. But the storm her silence carried was only beginning to rise. Angela walked down the quiet street, her sweater still damp, but her composure unshaken. She carried herself with dignity, though deep inside, her chest tightened with both pain and resolve. People like Rick Miller had humiliated her before, but this time felt different. The whispers in the cafe told her the truth. People had seen it, and some had recorded it. Still, she didn't think of herself. She thought of her son. That evening, in her small, neatly kept home, Angela placed her stained sweater in the wash and sat at the kitchen table. On the wall hung a single framed photo, Marcus Carter in uniform, standing tall, his beret tucked under one arm, medals pinned proudly across his chest. Her lips curled into a soft smile. Miles away, Marcus Carter stepped off a military transport plane, Broad-shouldered and commanding, the U.S. Army Special Forces captain had returned from a classified mission overseas. His presence commanded respect wherever he went, but to him, the only person who truly mattered was his mother. At the airport, his childhood friend Tony Miller, no relation to Officer Rick, waited. Tony, also in uniform, grinned as he clasped Marcus's hand. "Home at last, brother." Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Feels good to be back. First stop, Mom's house." As they drove through town, Marcus noticed the tension in the air. People glanced at him and Tony, whispering, pointing. It wasn't the usual recognition of soldiers, it was something heavier. Tony hesitated before speaking. "Marcus, something happened at the cafe this morning. It involved your mom." Marcus's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. "Tell me everything." The soldier who had faced enemies overseas was about to face a different kind of battle at home, one he would not let slide. By nightfall, the small cafe incident had already slipped beyond the town's borders. A shaky cell phone video, recorded by Detective Laura Hayes, circulated through social media. The clip was short but powerful. Officer Rick Miller deliberately pouring hot coffee over Angela Carter, followed by her quiet, dignified reaction. The video caught fire. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Comments flooded in. "How can an officer act like this in public? That woman's silence is stronger than his cruelty. Someone find out who she is." At the library the next morning, Angela pretended nothing had changed. She shelved books, smiled at children, and greeted regulars with warmth. But she noticed the stares, some sympathetic, some pitying, and some filled with shame for not having defended her. Mrs. Evelyn Brooks stopped by, clutching Angela's hand. "The world saw, dear. They saw everything." Meanwhile, Officer Rick strutted into the precinct, convinced he'd face no consequences. Sheriff Tom Reynolds gave him only a stern glance. "Keep your head down, Miller. You've stirred enough dust." Rick smirked. "It'll blow over. It always does." But Detective Hayes had other plans. She forwarded the video to a contact in the press, unwilling to let it be buried. That afternoon, Marcus Carter arrived home. He embraced Angela tightly, the calm soldier masking the storm inside him. "Why didn't you call me?" he asked softly. Angela shook her head. "Because I knew you'd come running, and you've already sacrificed enough." Marcus glanced at the television. The news anchor's voice cut through the room. Local officer caught in viral video pouring coffee on black woman. Investigation pending. Angela lowered her eyes, but Marcus straightened, his decision made. "He disrespected the wrong woman. He has no idea who you raised." By the next morning, the whole town buzzed with talk of the video. The cafe was busier than usual, people hoping to catch a glimpse of Angela Carter, the woman whose silence had shaken the internet. But Angela avoided attention, quietly preparing for another day at the library. Marcus, however, was not one to stay in the shadows. Dressed in civilian clothes, his posture still sharp with military precision, he walked through town alongside Tony. People recognized him, some whispered with pride, others with relief. Word had spread quickly. Angela's son wasn't just any man, he was a decorated Special Forces captain. At the precinct, Officer Rick Miller grew restless. The video had embarrassed him, but he still believed his badge shielded him from real consequences. Sheriff Tom Reynolds called him into his office. "Rick, the mayor's on my back. The press won't let this go," Rick scoffed. "It's overblown." "She didn't even fight back. Just some quiet old woman." Reynolds leaned forward, his tone sharp. "That quiet old woman raised Captain Marcus Carter. You know who that is?" Rick blinked, thrown off for the first time. "What difference does it make?" Detective Laura Hayes, standing nearby, crossed her arms. "It makes a difference because the whole country respects him, and now they know what you did to his mother." That afternoon, Marcus entered the cafe where it all began. The crowd hushed as he walked in, towering, calm but radiating authority. Angela wasn't with him this time. This was his moment. Rick sat at the counter, coffee in hand. When he noticed Marcus approaching, his smirk faltered. "You," Marcus said quietly, his voice like steel. "You poured coffee on my mother." The cafe held its breath. A storm was about to break. The cafe fell silent, the hum of conversation replaced by tension sharp enough to cut through the air. Marcus Carter stood tall in front of Officer Rick Miller, his calm presence commanding the room, every eye locked on them. Rick tried to mask his unease with arrogance. "You must be the son," he sneered, leaning back on the counter stool. "Looks like your mom can't handle herself without calling in backup." Marcus didn't flinch. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so that every word carried weight. My mother didn't need backup. She showed more strength in her silence than you ever will in your badge. The words struck hard. A ripple of murmurs ran through the crowd. Rick chuckled, though his laughter was brittle. You think being a soldier makes you untouchable? This is my town, my rules. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his tone remained steady. I've led men through battlefields you can't imagine. I've stood against enemies who didn't care if I lived or died. And not once. He leaned forward, his eyes piercing Rick's. Not once did I tolerate disrespect to my family. The cafe erupted in whispers. Someone pulled out a phone, recording the confrontation. Detective Laura Hayes, who had followed Marcus inside, finally spoke up. Rick, I'd watch your mouth. The entire country is watching you now. Rick's smirk faded. He glanced around and saw every phone aimed at him, every witness ready to spread this moment like wildfire. For the first time, his confidence cracked. Marcus took a step back, but his voice carried like a command. This ends today. You won't touch her again. You won't humiliate her again. And if the law won't stop you... He paused, his eyes burning. I will... The room erupted with applause. The cafe shook with applause, the sound rolling like thunder. Customers who had stayed quiet during Angela's humiliation now stood, clapping and cheering for Marcus. Their hesitation was gone. Someone had finally spoken what they all wished they could. Rick Miller's face flushed red. He slammed his hand on the counter, trying to regain control. Enough. I am the law here. You think you can march in and embarrass me? Marcus didn't blink. His voice was calm but sharp as a blade. You embarrassed yourself when you poured that coffee. The uniform doesn't make you the law. Your actions do. And right now, the world has judged you. Phones were everywhere now, capturing every second. Rick's confidence eroded under the glare of 100 lenses. He glanced toward the door, hoping for backup, but none came. Detective Laura Hayes stepped forward. Her badge glinted as she spoke firmly. Rick, you've crossed the line one too many times. The department can't cover for you anymore. The crowd gasped. A fellow officer openly opposing Rick? That had never happened before. Angela, who had quietly entered behind Marcus, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried across the cafe. I've lived my life quietly, with respect for everyone. But respect is not weakness, and silence doesn't mean surrender. The crowd went still. Rick turned toward her, jaw tight, but the power in Angela's words pinned him in place. Marcus placed a hand on his mother's shoulder, steady and protective. You raised me to fight with honor, Mom. That's why I won't let him tarnish your dignity again. For the first time, Rick realized he was cornered, not by fists or weapons, but by truth, by eyes that no longer feared him, and by a mother and son united. The cafe door swung open with a sharp creak. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stepped inside, his heavy boots echoing against the floor. The chatter died instantly. Everyone knew why he was there. His gaze swept the room, landing on Rick Miller first. The officer's smirk returned, as if reinforcements had arrived. Finally, Rick muttered under his breath, straightening his uniform. Sheriff, you saw the video. These people are trying to twist it. You know me. You know I was just doing my job. Reynolds didn't respond immediately. He adjusted his hat, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the crowd. Dozens of phones were still lifted, recording. The sheriff knew every word spoken here could spread by morning. Marcus stood tall, his arm resting protectively around Angela. Sheriff, he said evenly, this man poured scalding coffee on my mother in front of witnesses. He has humiliated her, and he continues to abuse his power. A hush fell. The tension between Marcus's commanding tone and Rick's arrogance pulled the air tight. Rick scoffed, gesturing at Angela. She's making a spectacle out of nothing. Look at her. She's fine. No harm done. Angela finally stepped forward, her voice quiet but unwavering. Harm isn't always measured in burns or bruises. Sometimes it's measured in the dignity stripped away by those who should protect. The cafe erupted in murmurs of agreement. Even Sheriff Reynolds' stern face softened for a moment. Detective Laura Hayes added firmly, Sir, I recorded everything. This isn't just small-town gossip. It's evidence. If you ignore this, the world won't. Sheriff Reynolds drew in a slow breath. His eyes lingered on Marcus, recognizing the military medals pinned to the son's chest in the viral photo. The sheriff knew the balance of power was shifting fast, and Rick Miller's shield of authority was crumbling. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stood frozen for a moment, the cafe filled with restless silence. All eyes locked on him, waiting for a decision that could either restore or destroy trust in the law. Rick Miller shifted impatiently, whispering harshly, "Come on, Sheriff, back me up. You know these people are overreacting." But Reynolds didn't answer. His gaze shifted to the crowd, dozens of townsfolk, their phones raised, eyes burning with expectation. Then he looked at Angela Carter, who stood tall despite her quiet nature. There was no fear in her expression, only truth. Finally, Reynolds spoke. His voice carried weight. "Rick, I've overlooked your behavior before, too many times. But this time, you humiliated a woman in public on camera, and that woman happens to be the mother of a decorated Special Forces captain. This isn't going away." Rick's face drained of color. "You can't be serious." Detective Laura Hayes stepped forward, her tone sharp. "We've got more than enough to launch a formal investigation. The department has protected you long enough, Rick. The world is watching." Marcus placed a steady hand on the table beside him. His voice was calm, but it resonated like thunder. "My mother taught me patience. She taught me strength. But she also taught me that silence can end when justice is denied. If the law won't hold you accountable, I will." The crowd erupted, some chanting Angela's name, others recording Marcus's words with tears in their eyes. Sheriff Reynolds exhaled heavily, his decision clear. "Officer Miller, hand me your badge and weapon. You're suspended effective immediately pending investigation." The cafe exploded with applause. Rick froze, his arrogance shattered. For the first time in years, he was powerless. And Angela Carter. She finally raised her chin, her silence replaced with quiet triumph. The sound of applause thundered through the Morning Brew Cafe, rattling Rick Miller's pride more than any punishment ever had. His hand trembled as he unpinned his badge, slamming it into Sheriff Reynolds's palm with defiance. "This town doesn't know what it's losing," he spat, but no one listened anymore. His power had evaporated like steam off cold coffee. Angela Carter stood quietly near the window, her blouse still faintly stained, her scarf damp. For a moment, the weight of years, the looks, the dismissals, the quiet endurance, pressed heavily against her shoulders. Then Marcus turned to her, his voice soft. "You didn't raise me to stay silent, Mum. You raised me to do what's right. Today, the world finally heard you, even when you didn't say a word." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. Instead, she reached out and touched his arm. "Marcus, it wasn't me they heard. It was you. It was all of them." She glanced at the crowd, students, workers, elders, neighbors, all standing together, no longer willing to let silence smother dignity. Detective Laura Hayes slipped her phone into her pocket, a small smile on her lips. "Angela, you may not have spoken loudly, but your presence shouted louder than anything I've ever heard." Outside, the protest had begun to swell. Dozens more gathered with signs, their voices rising as words spread across Ridgeway. Journalists arrived with cameras, capturing the chants of strangers united by a single message: protect black women, hold power accountable. Sheriff Reynolds, weary but resolute, looked around the cafe. "Maybe this is the beginning of something we should have done long ago." Angela Carter straightened her scarf, her quiet strength undeniable. "It's not the beginning," she said softly. "It's the reckoning." And as the cafe doors opened, light poured in, marking the end of Rick Miller's reign and the start of something far greater. By evening, Ridgeway no longer looked like the same quiet town. Outside the Morning Brew Cafe, a crowd had swelled into the hundreds. Some held candles, others lifted hand-painted signs: "Justice for Angela, silence is not consent," and "No badge above the law." The chants echoed through the streets, carried by people who had never met Angela Carter, but felt like they had known her forever. Marcus stood beside his mother at the cafe doorway, his arms steady around her shoulders. Reporters jostled for position, cameras flashing. But Angela didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become the symbol of strength, her quiet face the rallying cry of a community tired of swallowing injustice. Sheriff Tom Reynolds stepped up to the microphone, hastily set up outside. His usual confident tone was gone, replaced by something wearier, heavier. "This department has failed to protect the dignity of our citizens. Tonight I promise a full review of all complaints filed in the last decade. No stone will be left unturned." The crowd cheered, but Marcus knew promises weren't enough. He stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the noise. "Justice is not a speech. It's not a headline. It's work. Work that starts now. If this town wants change, then we must demand it every single day, not just today." His words rolled through the crowd, and something remarkable happened. People began sharing their own stories. A black teacher spoke about being pulled over 3 times in a month. An elderly Latino man described an officer mocking his accent. One by one, voices rose, and Ridgway discovered its collective strength. Angela listened, her hands clasped calmly. For decades she had been quiet, carrying dignity like armor. Tonight, the town carried it with her. The sun rose over Ridgway with an unfamiliar hush. What had begun as one woman's humiliation had erupted into a movement too powerful to silence. Angela Carter sat at her kitchen table, her hands curled around a cup of tea Marcus had made her, the steam rising like a prayer. Her phone buzzed. It was an official statement from the governor's office. Officer Rick Dalton has been permanently dismissed from the Ridgway Police Department. A criminal investigation is underway. Civil rights reforms will be introduced across the state. Angela's eyes filled, not with tears of pain this time, but of relief. Later that afternoon, the town square filled once more. Marcus stood on stage beside his mother, his Marine uniform pressed sharp, his medals catching the sunlight. The crowd cheered as Angela was invited forward, not as a victim, but as a symbol. The mayor handed her a plaque engraved with words that would echo for years. To Angela Carter, "Your silence spoke louder than hate. Your dignity gave this town its voice." The applause thundered. For a moment, Angela almost faltered, unused to being the center of attention. Then she straightened her back, lifted her chin, and simply nodded. It was her way of saying, "We are not done, but we are stronger now." Marcus whispered to her, "You didn't just stand tall, Mama. You changed everything." From that day forward, the people of Ridgway no longer whispered their truths. They shouted them, marched with them, and lived by them. The name Angela Carter became etched in local history, not as the blind woman mocked in the street, but as the mother whose grace sparked a revolution. And Officer Dalton, his name was forgotten, buried beneath the roar of justice that Angela Carter's silence had awakened.